Karen chainsawed through my fence at 7:15 a.m. because walking to the mailbox took her an extra 30 seconds. I bought her entire property and turned it into a dog park. But let me back up, because the chainsaw morning was just the beginning of the most insane HOA revenge story you've ever heard. Picture this. I'm drinking coffee in my kitchen when I hear power tools firing up way too close to my house. I look outside, and there's my HOA president in designer yoga pants and safety goggles, attacking my 6-foot cedar fence like she's competing for the suburban psychopath Olympics. Her exact justification? This shortcut saves me time, and I have important HOA business. Important HOA business. With a chainsaw. At 7 in the morning. Wood chips flying everywhere, the smell of sawdust mixing with her expensive perfume, and this woman standing there like she'd just performed community service instead of committing felony property destruction. So I smiled real wide, pulled out my phone, and started documenting what would become Karen's very expensive mistake. What would you have done? Called the cops immediately, or let her dig her own grave deeper? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and make sure you're subscribed to HOA Stories, because these neighborhood nightmares are everywhere. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up living next to a woman who thinks property destruction is a valid time-saving strategy. 6 months earlier, I was Jake Morrison, recently divorced electrician looking for a fresh start after my marriage imploded. The settlement left me with enough cash to buy a modest ranch house in Willowbrook Estates, one of those cookie-cutter developments that promises family-friendly HOA management and community-focused living. What they don't mention in the brochures is that your community focus might involve chainsaws. I chose this neighborhood specifically because I wanted stability for my twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, who are 8 years old and spend every other weekend with me. After months of apartment living and awkward custody exchanges in parking lots, I needed a real home with a real backyard where we could plant vegetables and build tree forts and do all the dad things I'd been dreaming about during those lonely Tuesday nights. The house was perfect. 3 bedrooms, decent-sized lot, and the kind of quiet street where kids could ride bikes without dodging traffic. Willowbrook Estates looked like suburban paradise on steroids. 47 homes built in the mid-90s, mostly middle-class families and retirees, the kind of place where people actually wave when they drive by instead of pretending you don't exist. The HOA dues were reasonable at $85 monthly, supposedly covering landscaping and snow removal. Most of my neighbors seemed refreshingly normal. Elderly couple named Henderson next door who brought me homemade cookies that actually tasted homemade. Young family called Rodriguez across the street with kids who immediately adopted my daughters into their sidewalk chalk empire. Everyone seemed genuinely welcoming, which should have been my first clue that something was lurking beneath all that suburban perfection. I spent the first 6 months renovating like a man possessed, partly because the house needed work, and partly because staying busy kept me from thinking about how quiet the place was when my daughters weren't there. New fence around the backyard, raised bed vegetable garden, small workshop shed where I could do electrical side jobs. The fence was my pride and joy. 6-foot cedar boards, galvanized hardware installed exactly 2 feet inside my property line because my divorce lawyer had drilled into my head that boundary disputes are expensive headaches nobody needs. I even had the property surveyed before installation, because getting burned once by lawyers and paperwork teaches you to do everything by the book or pay for it later. That fence blocked the direct path from Karen Delacroix's corner lot to the neighborhood mailbox cluster. Previously, she'd cut through the empty lot that became my property, but now she had to walk an extra 30 seconds around the block like every other human being on planet Earth. For most people, this would be a minor adjustment requiring maybe 2 seconds of thought. For Karen, this was apparently grounds for declaring holy war. Karen had been HOA president for 6 years running, mostly because nobody else wanted the job, and she ran unopposed in elections that drew maybe 12 voters on a good day. She lived in the biggest house on the corner lot, drove a white Escalade with personalized plates reading HOA Queen like some kind of suburban monarchy, and had a husband who traveled constantly for work. The neighborhood kids were legitimately terrified of her. Parents crossed the street to avoid conversation, and she had a reputation for measuring grass height with an actual ruler and sending violation letters written in red ink like some kind of homeowners association blood oath. Her first approach was what you might call diplomatically entitled. She knocked on my door 3 days after I finished the fence, wearing a fake smile and carrying a plate of store-bought cookies still in the plastic container. "I was wondering if you'd consider installing a gate for community access," she said, like she was offering me the chance to donate to charity. It would really help with neighborhood walkability. I politely explained that it was my property, my privacy, and my daughter's safety zone. Her face went through this fascinating transformation, like watching a computer crash in slow motion, while the hard drive makes those grinding sounds that mean you're about to lose everything important. 2 days later, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. Apparently, my fence violated community aesthetic standards under Section 12.3b of the HOA bylaws, with a $200 fine that would increase by $50 daily until I achieved compliance. I spent that evening reading every page of our actual HOA documents, and guess what? Section 12.3b doesn't exist anywhere in the real bylaws. My divorce had taught me to always demand specific citations in writing because people love to make up rules when they think you won't check their homework. Most people just pay the fine rather than do the research, which is exactly what Karen was counting on, but I wasn't most people anymore. Karen's next move was straight out of the petty dictator playbook. If you can't win legitimately, rig the game. She called an emergency HOA board meeting for Thursday evening, which sounds official until you realize the board consisted of exactly 3 people. Karen, her neighbor Bryce, who'd vote to ban oxygen if Karen asked, and a rotating third seat that had been mysteriously vacant for 8 months. The meeting location was Karen's living room, because apparently democracy works better with matching throw pillows and scented candles. I only found out about this kangaroo court because Mrs. Henderson mentioned it while we were getting mail Friday morning. "Seems like they voted on your fence situation," she whispered, glancing around like Karen might be recording us from the bushes. According to the official minutes Karen had already typed up, my fence created a pedestrian safety hazard and reduced property values throughout the community. The vote was 2-0 to uphold the violation, with Bryce's signature looking like he'd practiced it beforehand. Here's what Karen didn't know. My divorce had turned me into a legal research machine. When someone tries to destroy your life with paperwork, you learn to read fine print like your survival depends on it. I spent Saturday at the county clerk's office, that fluorescent-lit temple of bureaucracy that smells like old paper and crushed dreams, digging through property deeds and HOA documents until my eyes burned. The good news? My fence was completely legal, properly permitted, and sitting entirely on my land. The better news? Karen's emergency meeting violated the original 1994 covenants requiring 7 days advance notice to residents. Her little tribunal was as illegitimate as everything else she'd been doing. That night I became the neighborhood's anonymous truth teller. I printed 47 flyers titled "Your Neighbor Who Actually Reads the Fine Print," complete with copies of property laws and HOA violations. At midnight, I distributed them to every mailbox except Karen's, because sometimes the best way to fight a bully is showing everyone else that the emperor has no clothes. My divorce taught me that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and Karen's whole operation depended on people not knowing their rights. Karen's retaliation came faster than a pissed-off hornet. Monday morning, my work van got ticketed for commercial vehicle violation, despite being parked in the same spot for months. Tuesday brought a surprise county inspector investigating anonymous complaints about unpermitted electrical work. The inspector spent 20 minutes examining my perfectly legal upgrades before apologizing for the waste of time. Wednesday, Karen started walking her designer poodle along my fence twice daily, letting it mark territory like she was claiming my property one piss at a time. But something beautiful was happening. Mrs. Henderson approached me while I was weeding, speaking in whispers like we were planning a revolution. "We got violation letters too," she said, "about our garden gnome being unauthorized. Had that gnome 15 years. The Rodriguez family stopped by that evening with their own story. Karen demanded they remove ethnic decorations, which turned out to be gorgeous terracotta planters with succulents. I realized Karen hadn't been targeting just me. She'd been systematically terrorizing the entire neighborhood, and people were finally connecting the dots. The breaking point came Saturday evening when I was building a bookshelf for my daughters. It was barely 6 p.m. when Karen called police claiming industrial noise disturbance. Officer Martinez arrived looking annoyed, measured decibel levels with an actual sound meter, found no violation. As he left, he pulled me aside. "We get calls about this address monthly, different complainants every time, never any real violations. Thought you should know." That's when everything clicked. I installed security cameras covering my property that weekend, completely legal since they only monitored my own land. More importantly, I started attending actual HOA meetings. Those pathetic monthly gatherings where Karen talked to herself while Bryce nodded like a dashboard dog. My lawyer had hammered into my head that documentation beats emotion every time. So I began keeping detailed records, dates, times, witnesses, everything Karen did. Patterns become obvious when you write them down. And Karen's pattern was harassment, plain and simple. She noticed the cameras within hours and hand-delivered a note that same evening: remove surveillance equipment immediately or face legal action. I responded with certified mail explaining my right to monitor my own property. When she had to sign for that letter, her face went through this incredible transformation, like watching someone realize they've been playing checkers while everyone else moved to chess. But here's the twist that changed everything. 3 other neighbors approached me after that weekend, each carrying their own stack of bogus violation letters. Karen hadn't just been harassing me, she'd been running a neighborhood-wide intimidation campaign for months. Mrs. Henderson had violations for her garden gnome. The Rodriguez family faced fines for ethnic decorations. Even quiet Mr. Patterson got cited for his American flag being improperly displayed. What I thought was a personal dispute was actually a systematic abuse of power, and now I had allies who were just as fed up as I was. Karen had made her first real mistake. She'd shown me that I wasn't fighting alone. Sometimes the best thing a bully can do is reveal how many people they've been bullying, because that's when those people start talking to each other. And once people start talking, bullies start losing. The chainsaw morning happened exactly 1 week after I installed those security cameras, and I'm convinced Karen planned it that way. Tuesday, 7:15 a.m. I'm buttoning my work shirt when I hear power tools firing up way too close to my house. At first I figured it was road construction, but then I looked out my kitchen window and witnessed something that made me question the fabric of suburban reality. Karen Delacroix, dressed in designer yoga pants like she was heading to Pilates, attacking my fence with a chainsaw like she was competing for the neighborhood psychopath Olympics. I grabbed my phone and hit record while she cut a perfect 4-foot section out of my fence, scattering cedar chunks across my tomato plants like woody confetti from hell. The smell of fresh sawdust mixed with her overpowering perfume created this surreal combat zone atmosphere that belonged in a fever dream, not a Tuesday morning in Middle America. She even improvised hinges using my fence posts, creating her own personal gateway to convenience because walking 30 extra seconds was apparently beyond her physical capabilities. When I stepped outside in my work clothes, Karen looked up from her destruction with the kind of righteous confidence usually reserved for people who've just discovered fire. "I'm creating emergency access for community safety," she announced, wood chips clinging to her $100 workout top. "You can bill the HOA for any damages." I kept my voice level and kept filming. "Ma'am, you're destroying my property with power tools." Her response was peak Karen entitlement. "I'm improving community infrastructure for everyone's benefit." I called police while still recording, and Officer Martinez arrived within 20 minutes looking like he'd rather be chasing actual criminals. By then, Karen had undergone a complete personality transplant from chainsaw-wielding property destroyer to victimized suburban mom dealing with an unstable neighbor. She claimed I'd threatened and intimidated her while she was performing necessary community maintenance. The video evidence told a completely different story, but then Marcus Delacroix arrived in his expensive German sedan and $1,000 suit, and suddenly everything became a legal chess match. Marcus turned out to be senior partner at Delacroix and Associates, specializing in municipal law with contracts throughout the county. Within minutes, Karen transformed from chainsaw maniac to confused community volunteer, being harassed by an aggressive resident. Officer Martinez pulled me aside with advice that changed my entire approach. "Press charges now, or this escalates until someone gets seriously hurt. People like this don't stop until the law makes them stop." That afternoon, I filed criminal property destruction charges. But more importantly, I started investigating the Delacroix money trail. What I discovered made Karen's fence obsession look like small potatoes. Marcus's firm held over $200,000 in annual contracts with our county, including snow removal, landscaping, and legal services. The exact same services our HOA supposedly hired through competitive bidding. Karen wasn't just power tripping. She was potentially running a corruption scheme funneling neighborhood money directly into her family bank account. The financial pattern was obvious once I started tracking public records. Our HOA dues had tripled during Karen's 6 years as president, but actual services remained identical. Meanwhile, Marcus's firm was getting no-bid contracts for everything from legal consultations to lawn maintenance. Every dollar we paid in increased fees was potentially ending up in Karen's household budget, which explained why she fought so viciously to maintain control. The community awakening happened organically when neighbors started connecting dots. Mrs. Henderson's garden gnome violation came right after she questioned HOA expenses at a meeting. The Rodriguez family got solar panel citations the day after requesting financial transparency. Sarah's kid's swing set became aesthetically non-compliant hours after she suggested competitive contractor bidding. Karen had been systematically retaliating against anyone who threatened her financial arrangement, using fake violations as weapons to silence dissent. Karen's counterattack was predictably desperate. She filed complaints claiming my security cameras violated community privacy standards that existed nowhere in our actual bylaws. She organized an emergency meeting about my threatening behavior, expecting her usual audience of 3 sycophants and getting shocked when 12 residents showed up demanding answers. When I played the chainsaw video, you could hear a pin drop except for people's jaws hitting the floor. That's when Eleanor Matsushima changed everything. This quiet, elderly woman who'd lived here since construction stood up with the kind of authority that makes courtrooms go silent. "I've been reviewing our governing documents," she said, producing a thick folder, "and none of these violations have any legal basis whatsoever." Eleanor was a retired paralegal who'd been quietly documenting Karen's illegal rulemaking for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had evidence that Karen's additional restrictions violated both our original covenants and state HOA law. Eleanor volunteered to help me file complaints with state oversight boards I didn't know existed, and suddenly Karen's face went through this incredible transformation, like watching someone realize they've been playing poker with their cards face up while everyone else could see their bluff. She stormed out, slammed the door hard enough to crack the frame, and burned rubber, leaving the parking lot like she was fleeing a crime scene. But as I watched her taillights disappear, Mrs. Henderson grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "She once tried to fine us for our grandson's birthday party being too loud," she whispered. 8-year-old singing happy birthday was apparently a noise violation. That's when the full scope hit me. We weren't just fighting one unhinged neighbor. We were dismantling years of systematic terrorism that had been poisoning our entire community, one bogus violation at a time. Karen's lawyer husband entered the fight like a corporate shark who'd just smelled blood in perfectly manicured suburban waters. Marcus Delacroix appeared at my door Thursday evening carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my truck, delivering a cease and desist letter printed on letterhead so expensive you could probably frame it. The demands were elegantly simple: remove my security cameras, stop harassing his wife, and pay $3,000 in community damages for the emotional distress I'd allegedly caused Karen. The unspoken message was even simpler: back down now, or we'll bankrupt you fighting legal battles you can't afford. My divorce had taught me to recognize intimidation tactics wrapped in legal language, so I called Patricia Huang, the HOA specialist Eleanor recommended. Patricia took one look at Marcus's threat letter and burst out laughing like someone had just told her the world's best lawyer joke. "This is the most blatant abuse case I've seen in 15 years, she said, still chuckling. "And trust me, I've seen some real doozies. Your neighbor's husband just committed several ethics violations in one document. Apparently threatening residents while representing their HOA created conflicts of interest that could cost Marcus his law license, especially when his firm was simultaneously profiting from community contracts." Patricia ordered a complete title search of every property in Willowbrook, which sounded about as exciting as watching paint dry, until she called me 3 days later with news that made my coffee cup slip right out of my hands. Karen's corner lot had been designated as community green space in perpetuity, according to the original 1994 developer agreements. Her $600,000 house was sitting on land that legally belonged to every resident in the neighborhood. Every improvement she'd made, the pool house, expanded driveway, even her precious garden, technically belonged to all of us. Karen had been playing dictator over property she'd never actually owned. The smell of irony was so thick you could cut it with Karen's chainsaw. While Patricia was uncovering this legal bombshell, Eleanor was organizing residents at the library with the efficiency of a retired paralegal who'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. 23 households showed up, more community engagement than we'd seen during Karen's entire 6-year reign of terror. I presented our timeline of harassment while Eleanor provided legal context, and watching people's faces as they realized they'd been systematically scammed was like watching light bulbs turn on across a dark neighborhood. When we voted on demanding Karen's resignation and financial audit, the result was so unanimous you could hear the collective exhale of relief echoing off the library walls. But Karen's response was pure, scorched earth warfare. She filed harassment complaints with the sheriff claiming Eleanor and I were running a criminal conspiracy against her family. She provided edited video that made me look like an aggressive maniac, carefully removing the parts showing her attacking my fence with power tools. She even requested restraining orders to prevent me from attending HOA meetings, essentially trying to use the courts to silence community oversight. But desperation makes people sloppy, and Karen was operating in full panic mode. The Henderson couple revealed she'd offered them $500 cash to sign a statement supporting her harassment claims. Sarah shared that Karen promised to waive her kids' swing set violation in exchange for testimony about my threatening behavior. The pattern was obvious to anyone with half a brain. Karen was attempting to manufacture evidence and buy witnesses, which crosses the line from HOA abuse into felony territory. Then Karen made the mistake that turned community annoyance into parental fury. She approached my daughters at their elementary school, cornering Emma and Sophie near the playground while offering them candy and asking questions about Daddy and whether I ever acted scary at home. Multiple parents witnessed this interaction and immediately reported it to the principal, who banned Karen from all school property faster than you can say inappropriate contact with minors. When my ex-wife called asking about some unhinged woman trying to get dirt on me, I realized Karen had escalated from property disputes to attempted character assassination using 8-year-old children as weapons. The community response was like watching a sleeping giant wake up and stretch its muscles. Residents began systematically documenting every crazy thing Karen did, creating an evidence file that grew thicker than a phone book. Each desperate move she made strengthened our legal position while revealing her true character to the few neighbors still giving her benefit of the doubt. Local reporters started sniffing around the financial irregularities, and suddenly neighborhood dispute stories became HOA corruption investigation headlines that made Karen look like a suburban mob boss. Patricia filed for emergency hearings while Eleanor discovered $23,000 in improvement funds paid to Marcus's law firm for mysterious undefined services. The money trail showed landscaping contracts awarded to Marcus's buddies without competitive bidding, plus year-round snow removal payments despite services only happening during actual winter. Karen's HOA presidency was starting to look less like community service and more like organized crime with better yard maintenance. But here's the twist that changed everything. While we were building our legal case, Karen was building her own destruction. Her increasingly erratic behavior was scaring even her former allies, and Bryce, her loyal rubber stamp, finally grew a spine and started questioning her decisions. When your most devoted follower starts backing away, you know you've crossed into truly dangerous territory. The question wasn't whether Karen would crash and burn anymore. It was whether she'd take the whole neighborhood down with her. Eleanor's phone call came at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that started with me watching Karen pace her driveway like a designer-dressed prison inmate planning her next escape attempt. "Jake, you need to sit down for this," Eleanor said, her voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. I was already sitting with my morning coffee, but something in her tone made me set the mug down and grip the kitchen counter like I was bracing for impact. "I found something at the county courthouse that changes absolutely everything," she continued, and I could hear papers rustling in the background like she was handling evidence from a crime scene. While digging through property records for our legal case, Eleanor had discovered the original 1994 developer agreements buried in a filing cabinet that looked like it hadn't been disturbed since grunge music was popular. Hidden in the dense legal language was a clause that made my heart perform gymnastics. Karen's corner lot was designated as community green space in perpetuity. The words hit me like a cartoon anvil falling from a great height. Karen's $650,000 house was sitting on land that legally belonged to every resident in Willowbrook Estates, forever. Her entire property, the main house, pool house, expanded driveway, even her precious rose garden, had been built on community land that was sold illegally to the previous owner, who then flipped it to the Delacroix without anyone bothering to read the microscopic print that would have prevented this whole mess. The irony was so thick you could serve it at Thanksgiving dinner. The woman who'd been terrorizing us with fake property violations was essentially an extremely well-dressed squatter living on stolen community land while claiming authority over the people who actually owned it. Patricia's legal assessment was brutally simple. We could force Karen to buy the land at market value, demand she sell the house back to the community, or drag her through years of expensive litigation that would probably end with her family losing everything. But sitting there in my kitchen, surrounded by the smell of cooling coffee and the morning sunlight streaming through windows that Karen had tried to regulate with her imaginary bylaws, I felt something completely unexpected. Instead of the victory rush I'd been anticipating for months, a heavy weight settled in my stomach like I'd swallowed a bowling ball. This discovery gave us the power to destroy Karen's family as completely as she'd tried to destroy our community, and the opportunity for perfect revenge felt absolutely awful. Eleanor seemed to read my emotional state through the phone lines. "We're not trying to destroy lives here, Jake," she said in that calm, wise voice that made me understand why she'd been such an effective paralegal. "We're trying to restore fairness and heal our community. There's a difference between justice and cruelty, and that difference defines what kind of people we choose to be." That evening's emergency community meeting drew 34 residents to the library conference room, more people than had attended every HOA meeting in the past 3 years combined. The air buzzed with nervous energy and the distinctive smell of institutional coffee mixed with anticipation. Eleanor presented her findings with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades handling legal documents, and watching our neighbors' faces as they processed the implications was like watching a slow-motion explosion of understanding ripple through the room. The psychological shift was immediate and dramatic. Karen went from neighborhood dictator to community tenant in the span of 20 minutes. We weren't fighting harassment anymore. We were managing a real estate crisis that would test our community's character. Notably, Karen skipped the meeting despite receiving a hand-delivered invitation, and neighbors reported seeing a moving truck in her driveway that morning. Sometimes the most telling response is complete silence. The question was no longer whether we could win this fight. The question was what kind of victory we wanted to achieve, and whether we'd choose justice or revenge when the opportunity for both was sitting right there in black and white legal documents that smelled like old paper and possibilities. The community strategy session felt like a cross between a town hall meeting and a military planning operation, except instead of discussing bridge repairs or invasion tactics, we were democratically deciding how to handle our accidental real estate empire. Eleanor had commandeered the library's largest conference room, which smelled like old books and industrial carpet cleaner, and 28 residents showed up carrying notebooks, coffee and travel mugs, and the kind of grim determination usually reserved for people planning elaborate heists or surprise interventions. I stood at the front facing neighbors who'd transformed from suspicious strangers into genuine allies over the past few months of suburban warfare. Mrs. Henderson occupied the front row with a legal pad covered in her meticulous handwriting, looking like a court stenographer preparing for the trial of the century. The Rodriguez family had claimed an entire row, their kids doing homework while parents took notes on community governance. Even Mr. Patterson showed up wearing his good tie, treating this meeting like the most important business of his retirement. "We have 3 paths forward," I began, feeling like a game show host revealing prizes behind mysterious curtains. "Option 1 is the nuclear approach. Immediate legal action to reclaim community land. Karen loses everything, probably faces bankruptcy, and we get a valuable corner lot for parks or community facilities. Downside, years of expensive litigation, media attention, and the reputation as the neighborhood that destroys families for sport." The silence was so complete you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like anxious insects. Sarah raised her hand with the hesitation of someone asking a dangerous question. "What happens to their teenage son?" The room shifted uncomfortably as everyone suddenly remembered that total victory involves real collateral damage to innocent people, including kids who never asked to be part of their mother's suburban reign of terror. "Option 2 is the buyout solution," I continued, watching faces process the implications. "Karen purchases the land at fair market value, $180,000. Money funds genuine community improvements. Delacroix keep their house but lose HOA control. Everyone moves forward with dignity. Clean resolution, fair compensation, no destroyed lives cluttering our collective conscience." Eleanor nodded from her strategic position near the windows, afternoon sunlight highlighting her silver hair like she was some kind of suburban oracle dispensing wisdom to confused homeowners. She'd been advocating for this measured approach since the property discovery, arguing that communities heal through justice rather than vengeance. Sometimes the difference between winning and actually solving problems comes down to choosing solutions that let you sleep peacefully afterward. "Option 3 is compromise territory," I said, though I could already read the room's temperature dropping. Reduced payment of $90,000 plus immediate resignation and public apology. We get improvement funding, she keeps her home with smaller financial hit, and we test whether reconciliation is possible after major conflict. The secret ballot process took 20 minutes of people marking index cards like we were electing a new pope, complete with hushed conversations and strategic glancing. When Eleanor tallied results, option 2 won decisively with 18 votes, option 3 captured 7, and only 3 residents chose nuclear warfare. The message was crystal clear. Our community wanted justice seasoned with mercy rather than revenge served ice cold. Patricia's legal strategy was beautifully elegant in its simplicity. File quiet, title action, establishing community ownership, while simultaneously offering voluntary settlement terms. This created 30-day deadline pressure without immediate nuclear consequences, giving Karen time to make rational decisions while protecting our legal position. All costs would come from eventual settlement, meaning zero financial risk for individual residents. My divorce education had taught me to appreciate lawyers who think like chess masters rather than just expensive bulldogs. The budget planning session felt like Christmas morning for anyone who'd ever wondered where their HOA dues actually disappeared. Eleanor's transparent spreadsheet for the $180,000 windfall made everyone's eyes light up like kids discovering presents under the tree. Priority 1, professional HOA management company at $12,000 annually, finally ending the era of amateur hour dictatorship forever. Priority 2, accessible playground equipment worth $35,000 of swings, slides, and community joy. Priority 3, community garden with raised beds and irrigation systems. $15,000 of vegetables we could donate to the food bank while teaching kids where tomatoes actually come from. Remaining funds would earn interest in emergency reserves, protecting against future special assessments and major repair surprises. For the first time in years, residents were excited about HOA finances instead of dreading them. Transparency works magic, transforming suspicious neighbors into engaged community stakeholders who actually want to participate in local governance. Meanwhile, I spent evenings repairing chainsaw damage to my fence using premium materials that would outlast Karen's entire HOA presidency. Where she'd destroyed, I installed a decorative gate my daughters could use accessing the future community garden. Transforming destruction into improvement felt like the perfect metaphor for everything we were accomplishing together. Sometimes the best response to someone trying to tear down your boundaries is building something beautiful and permanent in their place. The professional management company Eleanor found specialized in community healing after board dysfunction, with 15 years' experience helping neighborhoods recover from exactly our type of situation. Their services included transparent financial management, professional meeting facilitation, and guaranteed compliance with state regulations. The cost was significantly less than continued warfare, proving that sometimes paying professionals to handle complicated situations is the smartest investment possible. Karen's scorched earth response arrived like a legal tsunami hitting a beach town full of people who'd never seen the ocean angry. Marcus served papers simultaneously to 15 residents involved in our community organization, claiming we were running a criminal conspiracy to commit extortion and seeking $500,000 in damages, plus restraining orders that would prevent us from breathing in each other's general direction. The strategy was brutally elegant. Bankrupt every family in the neighborhood through legal fees before our property case could reach court. Because if you can't win on merit, you can always try to outspend people until they surrender from pure financial exhaustion. The media blitz began within hours, with Karen calling Channel 7 News claiming she was the victim of a neighborhood mob targeting an innocent family. She arrived for the interview wearing her most sympathetic outfit, a soft cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and provided carefully edited footage that made her look like a suburban saint under siege by unstable residents. The smell of her desperation was masked by expensive perfume, but anyone paying attention could detect the underlying panic. Watching that broadcast felt like living in an alternate universe where chainsaws were gardening tools and property destruction was community service. But desperation makes people cross lines they'd never consider during rational moments, and Karen was operating in full survival mode. A private investigator appeared at my workplace, telling my boss I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to coworkers. Anonymous complaints flooded the state licensing board questioning my electrical work, despite every project being properly permitted and inspected by people who actually understood building codes. Most sickeningly, Karen began spreading poison at my daughter's school. telling other parents about my erratic behavior during custody exchanges and suggesting I might be an unfit father. The community siege intensified with military precision. Residents received threatening letters from Marcus's law firm demanding they cease all conspiracy activities or face individual lawsuits that would cost more than most people's annual salaries. Eleanor, our retired paralegal general, faced an Adult Protective Services investigation claiming she was being manipulated by unstable neighbors. The Rodriguez family discovered someone had reported them to immigration authorities despite being American citizens longer than I'd been alive. Karen's willingness to destroy innocent families, including elderly neighbors and legal immigrants, revealed the true scope of her moral bankruptcy. Marcus froze our HOA bank accounts, claiming fiscal mismanagement, leaving us without snow removal, just as winter weather hit with the timing of a cosmic practical joke. Legal bills mounted like credit card debt during a gambling addiction, as residents collectively spent $15,000 monthly fighting lawsuits designed to drain resources rather than resolve anything. Karen's financial warfare was working. Forced surrender through bankruptcy because most working families can't sustain legal battles indefinitely. Then Karen made the mistake that turned community annoyance into parental fury. She cornered my daughters at their elementary school, approaching Emma and Sophie near the playground with questions about Daddy's friends and whether I ever acted scary at home. The sound of other parents' shocked voices as they intervened still echoes in my nightmares. When the principal called to explain that Karen had been banned from all school property, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My ex-wife's call that evening confirmed my worst fears. Some completely unhinged woman approached me at the grocery store asking about your mental health and parenting, she said, her voice tight with protective anger. Jake, this person is dangerous. What the hell is happening over there? Hearing genuine concern from someone who'd divorced me was somehow more terrifying than any legal threat Marcus could file. But Karen's nuclear tactics were backfiring in spectacular fashion. Her surveillance operation was hemorrhaging money faster than a yacht with a hole in its hull, suggesting the Delacroix family was financially bleeding while accomplishing nothing except documenting their own illegal harassment. Marcus's law partners were reportedly questioning the ethics violations and frivolous litigation that threatened their municipal contracts worth hundreds of thousands annually. Sometimes the most effective strategy against enemies is giving them enough rope to hang themselves while staying safely out of range. Officer Martinez started making regular patrol stops, not because of Karen's complaints, but because her behavior had escalated beyond neighbor disputes into genuine criminal territory. During one visit, he shared something that made my blood run cold. 17 different complaints about various residents in 30 days, all from the same address. Someone's weaponizing our department, and that's not normal suburban conflict anymore. The community's response was methodical documentation of every crazy thing Karen did, creating an evidence file that looked like preparation for a war crimes tribunal. Patricia filed sanctions motions against Marcus while requesting expedited hearings on our property case, but the psychological cost was devastating. I lay awake calculating how long my savings could sustain legal bills while protecting my daughters. Eleanor's health visibly deteriorated under constant harassment, and several neighbors discussed surrender despite knowing it would only encourage Karen's terrorism of future victims. Here's the twist that changed everything. While we were building our legal fortress, Karen was simultaneously destroying her own credibility so thoroughly that even her former allies started backing away. Bryce, her loyal rubber stamp, finally grew a spine and publicly questioned her judgment during a neighborhood encounter. When your most devoted supporter abandons ship, you know the vessel is taking on water faster than anyone can bail. The knock on my door Tuesday morning had a different quality than the usual parade of process servers, more official, more serious, carrying the weight of federal authority that makes your coffee taste like sawdust, even when you've done nothing wrong. Agent Sarah Morgan from the FBI Civil Rights Division stood on my porch in a crisp navy suit, holding credentials and wearing the expression of someone who'd investigated enough hate crimes to recognize patterns from orbit. Mr. Morrison, we understand you've been documenting systematic harassment targeting Hispanic families in your community, she said, and my stomach dropped as I realized Karen's bigotry had escalated into federal crime territory. The interview lasted 3 hours, with Agent Morgan methodically reviewing Eleanor's documentation, while the smell of her government-issued coffee filled my kitchen like evidence of bureaucratic seriousness. Karen's harassment of the Rodriguez family, reporting legal citizens to immigration authorities, demanding removal of ethnic decorations, questioning their right to live in American neighborhoods, constituted civil rights violations that carried prison sentences measured in years rather than the slap-on-the-wrist fines we'd been expecting. Eleanor's paralegal training had created an evidence trail so thorough that federal investigators were genuinely impressed by witness statements, recorded conversations, and timeline documentation that revealed systematic discrimination patterns. Marcus's prestigious law firm was disintegrating faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Emergency partner meetings addressed growing scandals threatening municipal contracts worth hundreds of thousands annually, while their malpractice insurance company questioned coverage for the frivolous lawsuit epidemic Marcus had unleashed. The state bar investigation had accelerated from routine inquiry into active prosecution, and Marcus faced an ultimatum from his own partners: resolve this neighborhood nightmare immediately, or face partnership termination plus potential disbarment that would end his legal career permanently. But the school district crisis revealed Karen's most disturbing escalation yet. Principal Williams provided security footage showing Karen approaching multiple children near the playground, offering expensive toys while asking inappropriate questions about their parents' activities and relationships. The footage captured her targeting not just my daughters, but several kids whose families had opposed her HOA dictatorship. School district lawyers were preparing criminal referrals for attempted child manipulation, and Karen faced permanent banning from all educational facilities in 3 counties. Karen's surveillance operation had metastasized into something resembling a suburban intelligence agency run by someone who'd watched too many spy movies. Private investigators were following residents to work, photographing license plates at grocery stores, and conducting background checks on anyone who'd questioned her authority. The Henderson couple were cornered at their doctor's office by investigators asking invasive questions about their medical conditions and financial resources. The costs suggested Karen was hemorrhaging thousands weekly on neighborhood espionage, indicating either unlimited financial resources or complete desperation-fueled insanity. The county building inspection delivered the knockout punch Karen never saw coming. Inspectors discovered $75,000 in unpermitted additions that violated every safety code imaginable: electrical work that could start fires, plumbing modifications that violated health standards, and structural changes that made the house potentially uninhabitable. Karen faced $25,000 in immediate fines plus astronomical costs to bring everything to code or demolish the illegal construction entirely. The woman who'd terrorized neighbors over imaginary violations was living in a house that violated actual laws. My custody weekend became Karen's final desperate gambit when she approached Emma and Sophie at Riverside Park, offering them $100 toys while asking if Daddy ever talked about hurting the bad neighbors or had scary friends visiting the house. The sound of my 8-year-olds describing this interaction made my hands shake so violently I could barely hold the phone. Multiple parents witnessed the encounter and physically intervened, with one father literally standing between Karen and my children, while another live-streamed the confrontation on social media. Our neighborhood transformed into something resembling a witness protection community as Karen's behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. Residents organized escort rotations for children's activities, installed motion sensor lights throughout common areas, and coordinated with police for hourly patrol increases. The playground where kids used to ride bikes freely now required parental supervision and security protocols. Karen had succeeded in terrorizing an entire community, but her reign of fear was about to end spectacularly. Federal charges arrived with the swift efficiency of government machinery finally clicking into gear. Karen was arrested at 6 a.m. on multiple civil rights violations, with additional charges including stalking, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to violate constitutional protections. The FBI had been building systematic harassment cases for months, and Karen's documented behavior provided the perfect test case for federal prosecution of neighborhood terrorism. Agent Morgan explained that Marcus wasn't charged, but cooperation with the investigation was mandatory, or he'd face his own federal consequences. The property case proceeded uncontested with Karen in federal custody, and our community received clear title to land under her house plus automatic judgment for $180,000 in damages. But watching the FBI perp walk Karen out of her house in handcuffs while neighbors stood on their porches in shocked silence felt more tragic than triumphant. Her teenage son sat in their car crying while his father tried to explain how his mother's need for control had destroyed their entire family. Agent Morgan's parting words haunted me. We've seen this escalation pattern before. People in minor authority positions become so obsessed with maintaining power that they commit increasingly serious federal crimes. Your neighbor crossed every line possible because admitting she was wrong felt worse than destroying everyone around her. The federal courthouse on that crisp October morning looked like the set of a legal drama, except the coffee-clutching reporters lining the steps were real. The news vans weren't props, and the 30-plus Willowbrook residents filling the gallery represented months of suburban warfare finally reaching its conclusion. The smell of institutional disinfectant mixed with nervous perspiration as our entire neighborhood held its collective breath, waiting to see whether justice would actually be served or just performed for the cameras. Karen shuffled into the courtroom wearing an orange detention jumpsuit that made her look like a deflated balloon version of the designer-clad tyrant who'd chainsawed through my fence 6 months earlier. Her transformation was so complete that several neighbors didn't recognize her until she sat down. Marcus occupied the front row beside their teenage son, a family portrait of consequences that made even her harshest critics feel uncomfortable about celebrating victory. FBI agent Morgan presented the government's case with the methodical precision of someone who'd built a career on systematic harassment prosecutions. Evidence tables displayed printed emails, recorded phone calls, surveillance photos, and financial records that painted 18 months of escalating civil rights violations in living color. But here's what made the whole room gasp. Agent Morgan revealed that Karen's surveillance operation had cost over $90,000 in just 4 months, money that came directly from illegally diverted HOA funds that belonged to all of us. The prosecution recommended 2 to 3 years federal prison plus full restitution, but Karen's attorney delivered a curveball that nobody saw coming. The psychiatric evaluation revealed that Karen had been struggling with undiagnosed bipolar disorder complicated by prescription drug addiction. Specifically, anxiety medications she'd been obtaining from multiple doctors without telling any of them about the others. Her escalating behavior wasn't just power-drunk authoritarianism. It was untreated mental illness amplified by chemical dependency that had turned a controlling personality into a genuine danger to community safety. When Judge Harrison called for victim impact statements, I approached the podium carrying my daughter's drawings wishing Karen to feel better, because 8-year-olds somehow understand forgiveness better than most adults. Your Honor, I used to think this case was about property lines and HOA bylaws, I began, feeling the weight of 30 families' experiences on my shoulders. But standing here today, I realize it was actually about what happens when fear and mental illness collide with unchecked authority, and how communities can choose healing over revenge even when revenge feels justified. I described the fear, the financial stress, the systematic intimidation that had poisoned our neighborhood, but I also talked about what we'd learned about ourselves. We discovered that ordinary people can build extraordinary solidarity when they're fighting for something bigger than individual grievances, I said, and several reporters started scribbling notes about the community organizing aspects of our story. But Eleanor's statement delivered the mic drop moment that would end up on evening news across the country. She approached the podium with a thick folder and the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent months documenting every detail of Karen's reign of terror. Your Honor, Mrs. Delacroix didn't just violate civil rights and misappropriate funds, Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd survived decades of legal battles. She violated the fundamental principle that authority exists to serve communities, not to terrorize them. Then Eleanor opened her folder and revealed the bombshell nobody saw coming. Our investigation discovered that Mrs. Delacroix's harassment campaign targeted 14 of the 16 households that had questioned HOA finances over the past 3 years. This wasn't random neighbor conflict. This was systematic retaliation designed to silence financial oversight and maintain a corruption scheme that funneled community money into her family's business interests. The courtroom erupted in whispers as people processed the revelation that Karen's behavior was even more calculated than anyone had realized. She hadn't just been a crazy neighbor. She'd been running an organized intimidation campaign to protect a financial fraud operation that had stolen tens of thousands of dollars from working families. Judge Harrison's sentence reflected both the severity of the crimes and our community's advocacy for restorative justice. 18 months supervised release with mandatory treatment, full restitution of $127,000 in misappropriated funds, $50,000 for community healing programs, and permanent relocation away from our neighborhood. The court notes that victims advocating for their abusers' rehabilitation rather than maximum punishment demonstrates the kind of community character that makes democracy work, the judge said, and I felt proud of what we'd accomplished together. The property settlement was swift and decisive. Our community received clear title to Karen's land plus fair market compensation, while the Delacroix family would relocate for fresh starts that might actually help them heal as people rather than just change their address. But the moment that will stick with me forever came as we left the courthouse. A reporter asked what I'd learned from fighting Karen's tyranny, and I looked back at the building where justice had actually been served, then at 30 neighbors who'd transformed from frightened victims into engaged citizens. I learned that the best way to defeat a bully isn't to become one yourself, I said. It's to build something so strong and positive that bullying becomes irrelevant. That soundbite ended up on 3 national news programs, but more importantly, it captured what our neighborhood had really accomplished. We'd proven that ordinary people can choose extraordinary responses to extraordinary circumstances. 6 months after the courthouse victory, Willowbrook Estates graced the cover of Community Living magazine as Neighborhood of the Year, complete with glossy photos of children playing on our new accessibility-equipped playground and a feature story about the HOA that chose healing over revenge. Property values had jumped 15%, not because we'd gotten rid of Karen, but because we'd proven that ordinary neighbors could solve extraordinary problems when they worked together instead of suffering in isolation. The transformation still amazes me every morning when I drink coffee in my kitchen, looking out at the community garden growing where Karen's house once cast shadows over our street. Our $230,000 community fund had become the gift that kept giving. Playground equipment that made every parent smile, raised garden beds producing vegetables we donated to the food bank, and an emergency reserve that meant no more surprise bills when life happened to our infrastructure. My daughters had healed in ways that made me proud to be their father. Emma no longer flinched when strangers approached at the playground, and Sophie had stopped having nightmares about the angry lady with the loud machine. Family therapy taught us all that scary experiences can become strength when you process them with love and honesty. Their favorite part of our neighborhood now was the community garden, where they'd learned that beautiful things can grow from ugly situations if you're patient and tend them carefully. Eleanor had transformed from retired paralegal into full-time community healing specialist, helping 12 other neighborhoods navigate conflicts without the legal bloodbath we'd endured. Conflict is just democracy that hasn't found its voice yet, she'd tell frustrated residents. And her success rate was remarkable because she understood that most neighborhood disputes were really about people feeling powerless rather than actually disagreeing about important issues. The annual Fence Day celebration had become our neighborhood's favorite tradition, marking not Karen's defeat, but our community's discovery of its own strength. This year's barbecue filled the entire block with the sounds of children laughing, parents actually talking to each other instead of avoiding eye contact, and teenagers who'd rather hang out in our neighborhood than escape to the mall. Mrs. Henderson's grandson, now 10, had appointed himself the official neighborhood historian, interviewing residents about the time when neighbors learned to be friends. Karen's recovery updates came through Marcus every few months, and they'd become genuinely hopeful rather than just legally required check-ins. She was thriving in Colorado, working with a nonprofit that helped families navigate housing discrimination, and had become an advocate for mental health awareness in community leadership roles. She sends her gratitude for how you all handled everything, Marcus had written in his last email. She knows she could have lost everything, and your community's mercy gave our family a chance to heal instead of just survive. The house where the Delacroix once lived had become our community center, complete with meeting rooms that smelled like fresh paint and possibility rather than conflict and fear. I taught monthly workshops on property rights and democratic participation, sharing practical knowledge that could prevent future neighborhood disasters. My favorite part was watching new residents' faces when they realized they lived somewhere that actually cared about their well-being rather than just collecting their dues. My relationship with Sarah had evolved from crisis partnership into something permanent that made my daughters giggle and plan wedding decorations without any prompting from adults. My woodworking hobby had become a neighborhood service, building custom fences for residents who wanted boundaries that marked friendship rather than territory. Every project reminded me that the strongest barriers are the ones that protect what you love rather than exclude what you fear. The newest family moving into our renovated community center house got the full Willowbrook welcome. Homemade cookies from Mrs. Henderson, help installing their mailbox from the Rodriguez family, and a complete neighborhood history delivered with enough humor to make trauma educational. Their kids immediately joined the sidewalk chalk empire and backyard soccer leagues, proof that we'd actually created the kind of place where children could grow up feeling safe and included. Standing in my backyard last weekend, watching neighbors gather for another impromptu barbecue, I realized we'd learned something more valuable than how to fight bullies. We'd discovered how to build communities so strong and positive that bullying becomes irrelevant. The fence that started everything now marked the boundary of a neighborhood where people chose to solve problems together rather than suffer alone. Got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments below. Share your battle scars with the HOA Stories community because you're definitely not alone. And there are legal ways to fight back that don't require chainsaws or federal investigations. And smash that subscribe button for more stories about ordinary people who refused to back down when petty tyrants tried to make their lives miserable. Because sometimes the best way to deal with a Karen is to out-organize her with kindness, persistence, and really good documentation.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.